friends. Welcome to the Creative Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Caldwell, and I'm so happy you're here. Each episode, I take some time to chat with fellow artists about life, faith, and the impact of the arts.
Just being available to whatever God has, wherever He wants to use my testimony and allow me to just give hope and empower others to know this woman that you see today was not where I was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And statistics say one thing about my life. Whenever, my mother's 15, pregnant with me, has, 2 weeks after her 16th birthday, I was born. Statistics say I should still be a single parent living on welfare, unable to take care of myself without an education. And the fact that I graduated high school is a big thing. Reading that and stopping and thinking, my mom was 15. She could have made a choice and I wouldn't have been here. And so allowing people to see, no matter what they come from, God can make beauty from ashes.
Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. We've been experiencing some uncharacteristically cold weather in Texas, and I know other people are experiencing that across the country. So I hope wherever you are that you are staying warm and staying safe, and that you can grab a blanket, maybe a warm drink, and get cozy while you listen to today's episode. Before we get into the conversation, I want to invite you to subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. By subscribing to the show, each new episode will be ready and waiting for you on your podcast app. Today's conversation is with Amanda Winslett, who I was actually introduced to through Cian Smith, guest on episode 27. Amanda and Cian teach Zumba together, and I'm so glad that Cian introduced me to Amanda. Amanda is a wife. She was married this past June, and she is the mother of 2 boys. She has had a passion for dance and music most of her life and has been a Zumba instructor for almost 7 years. We talk about her passion for music that grew out of her love of choir growing up, and now she helps serve as a vocalist for her church's worship team. Amanda shares her incredible testimony, growing up in an abusive family situation, and then finding herself in a similar situation as an adult. She shares the story of finding the courage to leave an abusive relationship and how God has brought healing into her life. We talk about the power of words. The words can bring life or destruction. Recently, Amanda went back to school for ministry, and she has such a heart for reaching other women to help empower them in their journey. I love how she's using whatever realm she's in, whether that's Zumba, her work with Mary Kay, or her worship ministry, to be able to reach and touch the lives of others. I love what Amanda says in our conversation, that God's not calling me to be perfect. He's calling me to be on purpose. Enjoy my conversation with Amanda Winslett. Thank you so much for your willingness to come on the podcast.
Absolutely. I was really excited when Cian mentioned it. I was like, of course I'll talk to her. Why not?
Yeah, exactly. I'm so glad you did. For those that are listening, just wanted to share how we met each other or how we know each other. So Cian Smith, who was also a guest on the podcast, and I can link to her episode, is my sort of like step aunt, I guess. And then you guys know each other through Zumba, right?
Correct.
That's so cool. So how did y'all originally meet?
So I actually started teaching for the Cedar Hill Senior Center, and I guess it's almost 6 years. I think it's actually just turned 6 years in September, or that I've been there anyways. I've been there for 6 years. But when I started, Cian was actually a participant of my class.
Cool.
Yeah, so it was very interesting because I was like, hold on, this woman is twice my age and can high kick higher than me. What in the world? And the funny thing was that we began to, of course, I really like to connect with my participants. I'm not one to just go and do my job and leave. Like, I really want to just build a relationship with them.
Right.
And so I kind of, as I started getting to know Cian, she's like, oh, well, I've taken, I taught dance. I had a studio. And so at one point I told her, I was like, you should be doing this.
Yeah.
So I actually encouraged her to get her Zumba certification because I was like, there would be times, as a mom at this point, I was a single mom with the 2 boys, and there'd be times that I needed someone to sub. Well, Cian would be able to, but I was like, you've got to have a certification. So that's kind of how that started. But we initially met, she was just taking my class. And after that, it just grew from there. So our friendship and inside the Zumba world as well as outside. So she's amazing. I love her to death.
Yeah, she's awesome for sure. And she told me about you. She's spoken so highly of you and just like, you need to connect with Amanda and, get to hear her story. So I'm so excited to have you on the show today and get to actually officially meet you for the first time. So super fun. Yay. Well, do you want to just share with our listeners just a little bit about yourself, kind of, who you are and your family, stuff like that?
Sure. So my name is now Amanda Winslett. I actually just married in June.
Congratulations.
Thank you. In the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah.
It was a ride for sure. Let me tell you what.
Wow.
So newly married, just graduated as well. Same week I got married, I graduated with my bachelor's of arts in ministry.
Wow.
And then I have, so I'm a wife and a mother. I have 2 boys, 13 and 10, and that's Jade and Avery. And they're all boy. I will tell you that, both of them. I was a single mom. It would have been 10 years this December. So yeah, I've been running with it, and I've done a little bit of different endeavors as a single parent. I've always enjoyed working for myself. So having kind of my own schedule, and the blessing with Zumba was not only was I able to be a mother, but I could also go to school full time. So that's kind of been my life for about the past 6 years.
Yeah.
Was Zumba, school, kids. And then all of a sudden, God dropped this man in my life about 2 years ago, and we just got married. So it's been a journey, but that's just kind of about my family. And we're here in DeSoto, Texas, which is part of the DFW area. So I'm a Texan born and raised.
Woo-hoo. Yeah.
I love Texas minus the bipolar weather. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah. So I would love to hear some about kind of growing up and more about your story and how you got into dance, movement, music, all of those things. So do you want to share just a little bit about kind of your early years growing up?
Sure. So I guess I can start with a little bit of my testimony, but my grandparents raised me for about the first 6 years of my life. And the one thing that I share is that it was pretty abrupt with what happened in my situation. My mother was a teen mom. And at the age of 6, I remember going to school that morning. I was in a private Christian school and leaving that afternoon with her and my stepfather. And that stepfather at the time was someone I was terrified of because he was extremely abusive, mentally, physically, emotionally. And so literally I went from day to night, like my life completely was flipped upside down. At 6 years old, you don't even know what to do.
Yeah. You don't know how to process something like that.
No,
even as an adult, that's difficult to process.
Yeah. And it's very interesting because I've noticed just within my life that there's been a lot of suddenlies. And that's something that I have even, people have told me, God's moved in your life suddenly. And I was like, yes, but I also think that there's some negative things that have happened suddenly. But at that point, there was court process and everything. And it was one of those things that my grandparents were able to obtain grandparent rights that are here in Texas, to where it was very similar to like what a married couple would have in a divorce. So every other weekend I was there with my grandparents and things like that. And one thing is, first, because my mother's been the only one ever in my life. I don't know my biological father. So there was no one else stepping up, and kind of being my voice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, kind of advocating for you.
Right. And I also learned, unfortunately, as an adult, I now see that not all attorneys are for you. They're sometimes more for the parents. And so I don't feel that they were listening to where I wanted to be placed. But at the same time, I believe that God orchestrated that so I could be able to share, just growing up in my life with others to give them hope. Through high school, I did, and this again was a blessing, as my mother kind of grew into that place as a mom. I feel her and I are obviously closer now than we've ever been, but at that point in time, I was very upset and aware of what's going on. But as I got older, she made sure I was in choir. That was something I enjoyed, was singing. So I've always loved to dance. That's the interesting thing, because I even have pictures of me when I was little in like little tutus and stuff like that. But music has always been an outlet for me. And it can be a positive or a negative one, depending on what you listen to. I've now come to find out.
That's a good point. Yeah. I think people don't really think about that.
Yes.
Yeah, the negative sometimes.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I remember drowning in a lot of hard rock. And it's funny because I'll start naming off bands and Cian knows who I'm talking about because it's older hard rock.
Oh, yeah.
Like we're talking
The old school stuff.
AC/DC, Metallica, that kind of stuff. So
Yes.
I did go through a very dark season. However, I was still able to just music kind of helped pull me out. Not necessarily pull me out, but it was there through it, if that makes sense. If
Yeah.
I was feeling a certain way, I could put a certain song on. Sometimes I would have to turn the song because it would bring up either memories or emotions. But music has always been a huge part of my life. And at this place, I've taken all that I've learned because I competed in high school with solos and ensemble. So I would do both vocals and ensembles. I went to state several years in a row. And in state, they rate you, I think it's like 1, 2, 3. And I would sometimes clear it with just straight ones. And so I knew I was talented. I was gifted vocally. Didn't really start pursuing dance till later. And that, as far as high school years, I look back and just to kind of sum up a little bit of my testimony as far as what God has done in my life. This is kind of outside of the music world. There was a lot of drugs, alcohol, and that's the funny part is people are like, you used to smoke. And I was like, I know. And they're like, but you sing. And I was like, I know. And thankfully God, restored and didn't take my voice, but it was one of those things. I, found myself in a position with the father of my children. We never married, which was a blessing in disguise, although many pushed at that point. My grandfather, being the very wise man he gave me that out. He said, don't get married just because you're pregnant. I've seen my friends do that. He was born in 1941. The thing to do back in those days was you get married if you get pregnant. He goes, and all of my friends that have done that have landed with divorce. And so took his advice, and I'm very thankful I did. And because at one point I found myself, Jaden was 3.5 years old and Avery was 6 months old. And I was being pinned down on the floor by their dad, strangled. He was telling me he would not, he was going to kill me because he couldn't find his drugs. And so that life that I had created as a teenager followed me into young adulthood as a mom. And at that point, I will never forget. I was like, okay, God, if you get me out of this situation, I will turn around, I will go the opposite direction, and I'll start to follow you. And the great thing about Grace is that I'll never forget my 3-year-old ran around the corner, jumped on his dad, and it gave me the ability to fight back. Because I always tell people, I don't need a sob, oh, poor me story. I got up and I fought back at that point until I was able to get out of the house safely with my kids. And through that, where music has kind of played a part in this is I actually started going to church where my grandparents had raised me. I had started going back when I was pregnant with Avery, my youngest. And the one thing that I was able to be a part of was choir. So,
oh yeah. So kind of brought that together. Yeah.
Yes. And so it took a lot. And the one thing is I had to learn the difference from being a performing vocalist versus what worship truly looks like. And it took some years because I had been trained one way, but I had to, go through and start understanding what the Bible says about worship. And that goes with dance as well as, singing, any kind of musical outlet, dancing, the arts in general. Just it's an ability to express yourself. And worship to the Lord. And so it was something that I look back and I was so grateful for because it was able to connect me with the right people, the women that needed to come along my side and disciple me and to help me grow in my faith. Because at that point I was so broken and lost and total just self-esteem is totally in the toilet. I mean, it was horrible because I'd went through the emotional, because the interesting thing I find is that typically the man that you're raised around is the men you go after whenever you are looking for a spouse.
So interesting, but so true. Yeah.
Right. So what I had looked at as what was normal, because that was normal life from the age of 6 until I was 18. I found in a man who also was verbally abusive, physically abusive, emotionally abusive, just as the one was to my mother. And so that, and even my mom to this day, she apologizes because she obviously is divorced, and I'm very thankful for that. And she's with a man who absolutely loves her now and treats her right. And that was the big kicker.
Good.
But that was something that coming out of that, I had to understand that was not normal. And these women within the choir came along my side. And the interesting thing is that one of them that was in choir with me, she thought I was the stuck-up girl when I first came in because I was quiet to myself. I mean, again, insecure. And now she's one of my best friends and we are tight. And she's been there from the get-go. And there's been several other women that are still a part of my life and one of them's particularly actually encouraged me into Zumba. She came into a class I was taking Zumba. She did one song and that was it. And she sat in the back and watched and she'd videoed me. And she's like, this is something you should do. That point I was in between jobs. So I needed some kind of income because single parents, I mean, you got to pay bills. Rent doesn't stop just because you're single,
Yeah.
But it's just interesting how God opened up doors in that aspect to where I was able to walk through them and have those encourage me over the years from the very beginning all the way up into the point I am right now. So
that's so incredible to have those mentor figures or, just people to come alongside and to point out some of those giftings that were in you. And so cool. And I'm excited to hear even more about your story. And thank you for sharing. Just
absolutely.
It's vulnerable to talk about like some of these challenging and very painful things, that you've walked through. And so you talked about how kind of that time in high school sort of led into the early adulthood years. And where do you feel like sort of a shift started to happen for you finding your way out of that abusive situation, I guess?
I would say it was while I was pregnant with my second son. And at that point, again, I started going back to church because mentally in my mind, my mom had always taken us to church. Now, one interesting factor, I didn't point this out, is I went from a Pentecostal church at the age of 6 to a Catholic church. After going through Bible school, I understood a lot. Thankfully, I was able to grasp more on the theological perspectives of either. But at 6 years old, I looked back and I was like, that was probably one of the biggest shifts to where my faith was shaken to the core.
Mm-hmm.
So through high school, I was, I always joke around. I was like, the same kids I went to youth group with was the ones I partied with on the weekends and the ones that I was with confession in on Tuesdays. We were doing the same thing over and over. But as I look back, I'm going, okay, I started going back to church at the church that I was raised at whenever I was pregnant with my second son. And then my oldest was I guess he was probably around 2 years old when I started going back. I was like, okay, they need this stability was what I kept thinking in my mind it's a routine. It's something stable. This is what my mom did. And so that's when I started going back. And I think at that point, that's when God really started to work in my heart and show me the areas that needed to change. He showed me, not only, and everyone has their own perspective, but obviously I was living with a man I wasn't married to, wasn't living my life the Bible tells me to. And I had hidden that or blocked that out of my conscience for years because the world says this,
right?
This is okay. And so I lived that lifestyle knowing now I'll look back and I'm like, that was destructive. But God had started to slowly work in me in that time that I was in church. Because if the boys were in class, guess who was sitting in a pew? I was.
Right.
So I'm having to listen to my pastor, and he's still my pastor to this day. It's the same man. He's been there that long. So
wow, that's
he's
cool.
like gotten to see my entire life just completely be transformed. But yeah, I think that's where God started. That was the shift. And I started seeing, and then aside, this is kind of a joke, but it's very true. I knew I wasn't going to stay with the boy's father when I was giving birth to my second son, because I remember I had to have, first pregnancy, I had preeclampsia, I had to have a C-section. Second one, it was a routine. The doctor didn't want to take the risk. So he's like, we're just going to do a C-section again. I was like, okay, fine. And at this point, I was 23 years old, second child. They gave you the option to have your tubes tied. And mentally in my head, so this is 6 months prior to leaving their father, mentally in my head, I was like, I don't want to get my tubes tied. And I remember their father saying, well, we're not having any more kids. And in my brain, I said, no, we are not. But I already think at that point, I knew it wasn't going to last. And I just didn't really see a way out completely, because in that position, I was extremely vulnerable to the fact that I stayed home. He was an MRI engineer. I didn't have to work. I had left a corporate job with Jenny Craig that I'd been at for years so that I could stay home and take care of my boys. And that put me in a position, I found, where he had total control, to where I was terrified, because I'm going, how am I going to do this? This is not what I had, foreseen my life to be like. And so it was almost as if, I believe that God sometimes pushes us to that breaking point. And the night I left was that breaking point. But however, I believe it had been probably for about a year before I left that the Lord was preparing me mentally and emotionally. Now, not so much financially, because I had to live with family for a couple of years to get on my feet.
Mm-hmm.
He allowed that time within church for me to see, one, my worth, my value, and to kind of get a direction of, okay, where do I need to go? What do I need to do? And the one thing I can say that's always driven me towards him is wanting my sons to be brought up to be good, not only good men, but men of God, men of integrity, sensitive, but yet they can be able to be the head of household. So having that desire for my boys has really always driven me to stay, okay, I've got to continue going forward so I can pull them with me and I can train them up the way that they should go. So they're not doing the same thing, making those same mistakes that I made.
Yeah, that's so good. So beautiful. I would love to dive more into the kind of just the mental battle that goes on, when you're hearing essentially lies over and over, or hearing, destructive things. What was that journey like for you, kind of mentally and emotionally processing however far back you want to go, like even as a little girl, or, moving into adulthood? And what have you seen are things that have helped you to overcome those voices,
The one thing I think that, so this is, again, something I feel, and even to this day, sometimes I can battle those words, even as a child, things that had been spoken over me as a child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, words can be so powerful. And
yes,
for kind of like you said with music, like for good or for bad, can be, helpful
right.
or destructive. And
yeah. And so like, I even look back, like as a child, the blessing, I think, with my grandparents. So my grandfather was very much like a father figure to me. My stepfather
cool.
was probably, I kind of got, and again, I look at it as a blessing. I can see what a good man looks like versus what a not so good man looks like.
That's true. You kind of had like, a little example in front of you.
Correct. Yeah. And as I got older, of course, when you're living with a man that's very, negative, and then taking that on in a spouse, a lot of what was spoken over me as a child, I remember, and I used to get teased about my weight quite a bit when I was little. I was pretty chunky. It wasn't until high school when I started playing sports, you hit puberty and everything starts to fill out and you look like a woman, not, I looked like I was just chunky. But he would make comments about my weight. He would make comments, whenever I was in high school, my senior year, we went to New York City for a trip with choir, and it was the coolest thing ever. Got to see Broadway musicals, and I was all into show choir, so dancing, singing, loved it. And I was like, I want to be on Broadway. And I remember that dream being shot down by him verbally, like, where's the money in singing? How are you going to start that? Singing on a street corner, and just different things that were very negative. And then, of course, moving forward with the father of my children, continue, after having children, your body doesn't go back to normal. I mean, typically.
Right.
Plus, I gained quite a bit of weight with my first son. And so that started at that point, which I currently am pursuing my Mary Kay career again. But at that point, I was just starting out, wanted to, do something with Mary Kay, empower women. I mean, the company is amazing when it comes to empowerment of women. And that was kind of her mission, is to give women that ability to be financially a part of something, but still be able to be a parent, be a mom, be a wife.
Yeah, that's really powerful for sure.
Yeah. And I remember him shooting it down and telling me, oh, you're never going to drive a car. You're never going to do this. And so words are very powerful, because I used to starting to believe that. And I will say where music played a part. I'm sure many people know who Christina Aguilera is.
Oh,
But
yes.
it was the Stripped album. I will never forget, because I used to play it, and the songs, Beautiful, and it was talking about you are beautiful just the way you are. There was the one Stronger. It talks about you're pretty much what meant to harm me is now making me stronger. And so I used to jam out to that album and just speak those things over me. And this is even before I started getting back into church. And I guess that could even have been a process, interestingly enough. God can use secular words in music
For sure.
to talk to you. But yeah, like I look back, and so between that and then I started learning more scripture that talks about who I am in Christ, my identity in Christ. And that took some time, I will say. And it's just having those positive words of affirmation. My husband even remembers, and I haven't done it so much here on our mirror just because I'm trying, when you're first married, it's like, okay, it's our space now. But the bathroom mirror in my bathroom, always, whenever it was just me and the boys, I would take a expo marker and I would put I am, and then I would list things underneath that. So I am beautiful, I am worthy, I am smart, I am intelligent, I am healthy, and just speak those out. And literally, and this may sound cheesy, but I would sometimes, especially early on in single life, have to speak those verbally out loud. And I tell people all the time, the Bible tells us that there is life and death in the tongue, and what we speak out will come forth. And so I literally would verbally speak those to where I could hear it. So I could hear it and process it, because psychologically, and a counselor had once told me this, when you speak it out, you're not just thinking it, you hear it. And when you hear it, it's something that happens in our brain to make us start believing that and walking in that truth. So I literally, for years, I feel that I was, with God's help, undoing those negative thoughts and negative thought processes, which, again, I always talk about, you can be optimistic or pessimistic. Which one are you? And having to move on to being more optimistic versus, just always thinking of, oh, well, this worst case scenario. And that was one thing I used to always say too, is, worst case scenario is this. I'm not losing my life. I'm not losing finances. I'm not, and that was one thing with Zumba, with any kind of career path I've taken. Even now, I'm part of our worship team at church, and I absolutely love it. But I remember the first time I set foot on stage, I was shaky, I was nervous. And then I just remembered, I'm not here by chance. This is what, the Lord's been doing. And he slowly built me up. And I was like, I can help lead people into worship. Same with Zumba. I can teach a Zumba class. And then I even had to understand, you are going to mess up, Amanda.
Yeah.
You're not perfect. And I'll never forget, first time I even messed a step in Zumba. It was one of those, I was like, okay. And there's a running joke, and I can only say it to the seniors because some other people may get offended, but I always say, okay, I had a senior moment. I've hung around you guys too much. And I was completely blank sometimes. And I know Sienna and I both have done this, but it was just understanding that God's not calling me to be perfect. He's calling me to be on purpose for what he's wanting me to do.
Oh, that's a good quote right there. I love that. Not to be perfect, but to be on purpose. I love it.
Right. But yeah, it's just, it amazes me. 10 years ago, first off, I hate running. I don't care to work out. If you would have told me 10 years ago when I left the father of my children that, oh, Amanda, you're gonna teach Zumba, I would have laughed. First off, because I would have been like, what? I wasn't taking Zumba at that point, much less teaching. I don't even know if Zumba was around then.
Zumba, what?
Was it around? It may have just gotten started.
Yeah, it may have been pretty new at that point. That's true.
If you'd have told me, oh yeah, you're going to stand up, whenever because leaving the father of my children, I was able to, my grandfather, again, very, very wise man, had so much confidence in me that he helped me get on my feet with my Mary Kay business, helped me invest in inventory, because women will buy things that are on hand. And so that's where I actually, for 2 years, I built my business and was able to get on my own working for myself.
That's awesome. And that was at that point when you had left him and you were able to kind of be with family and build something that you could sustain.
Right.
And sustain yourself on.
And that was one, because I'd considered going back to Jenny Craig for a period of time. I think I went back for a small period of time until I realized they don't care about my life. They don't care about what my passion and my loves are for, which is my kids. And reality hit when I had to call into work. My youngest son, I was having to rush him to the ER. I forget exactly what was wrong. He had some kind of infection, nothing life-threatening, but I'd been up all night at the emergency room, had to bring him home, everything. And I remember calling into work, and my boss at the time had the audacity to tell me, well, why can't you just find a babysitter? And I wanted to scream. I was like, this is not for me. This corporate world is not for me. I like being my own boss, point blank. I like calling the shots. But at that point, I realized they don't necessarily care about me as a person. They care about what I can do for the company. And I was successful. I was one of the highest consultants in sales and everything for the company, but in the Dallas area anyways. But it was one of those things, I could not place that above my children, and I would not place that above my children. And so in that processing, that's obviously when I was like, okay, I'm going to just continue on to Mary Kay, keep going, this path. But all that to say, I remember starting out after leaving the boy's dad, I couldn't even stand up in front of 6 women without having anxiety and being fearful. We had skincare classes. Now it's all online because of COVID. But back then we'd go into people's homes and we'd do the skincare classes. And I couldn't even stand up in front of 6 women. I'd have to sit and my director used to always tell me, just sit down, do what's comfortable for you. And I was like, okay. And slowly over time, I built that courage up. And I look back, and it's funny how God orchestrates things for you in seasons, because I was like, if I wouldn't have done that, there is no way I could stand up in front of 30 plus women and teach Zumba, period.
That's for sure.
So, because they look to you, it's like not, wipe on, wipe off. That was easy in comparison to having to, tap the top of your head. We're going back to the top, tell them how many, and you're constantly, and this is another, I think it's a gift with instructors or anyone who's in dance, is your mind is literally 6 to 8 steps ahead. So you're constantly having to be on your P's and Q's. You have to know what's going on.
For real. That's for sure.
And so it's like, I look back and I was like, I do it like I brush my teeth every day now, but it's something that you have to build that confidence in. And so that took me to a place to build that confidence. And even, I remember my very first Zumba class, I'm looking at myself in the mirror and I'm like, you can do this. All of these routines, I'd taken all the routines my instructor had used, so I knew them, and it was rocky, but I kept going.
That's the main thing sometimes, is just take that next step, keep pushing through. It's so cool thinking about how God sort of prepares the way for us and puts us, like you said, in different situations and kind of gaining different skills. And sometimes we can be like, what is this even for? I don't understand how the dots connect kind of, but then looking back, it's like, oh, that was a skill that I was developing, or God was developing in me for this next thing,
Absolutely.
Super cool. Yeah. That's really awesome. So when you were just taking Zumba classes for a number of years, right, before you got certified?
I want to say I was taking for 5 years before I got certified.
Gotcha.
And that was in between. I was in between positions, still working Mary Kay, but at that point, it was one of those things I wanted something a little more stable, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Only commission-based can kind of be stressful. So I was like, okay, I need something to kind of weigh this out so that I can, because at that point I'd left the Jenny Craig company for good at that point. And so I was looking, I was like, what else can I do? And that's whenever my friend, who's kind of like a spiritual mom to me, was sitting in the Zumba class, and she's like, why aren't you doing this? Like, you are mimicking literally your instructor. Have you ever thought about it? And I was like, do they really make money? Like, that was my thought process. Can she really make a lot of money doing this? And so that's where my interest was piqued. And Maria helped tremendously. She's like, oh yeah. And she was showing me the way you make money as an instructor. You don't just teach at one place. It's, your contract. So at one point, I think I was at 5 different locations all at one time. So it was a little crazy, but I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And I guess what does your schedule look like now with teaching? And I know it's a little different, maybe pre-COVID. What did it look like? And then now post-COVID?
Well, it's fairly light at this point. Just so I'll go pre-college, because whenever I started Bible school,
Oh, that's
that's
right.
whenever it had to lighten a lot in the evenings, because I was taking afternoon and evening classes.
Makes sense.
So at one point in time, I was actually teaching 22 classes a week.
Wow.
And it was a mix. So I was teaching, majority of it was Zumba. And then I also teach for the seniors, it's toning in a chair. Everything is music based. They've really broadened my horizon on music, because they've taken me all the way back to the 50s and 60s, some of the songs that we play.
That's so fun. I love it.
So it was between toning, Zumba, and then I also taught aqua. And again, I've always done everything with music.
Yeah,
It's not all
that
of those
connection.
classes typically have music, because some people are like, the other aqua instructor doesn't use music. I was like, well, we use music because I need a beat.
Uh-huh. So when you're teaching aqua, that sounds really fun. Are you in the water as well? Or are you like on the side of the pool kind of thing?
I'm on the side.
Okay.
I think there was 2 classes I attempted to get into the water, and because they can't see my lower body, they don't know what I'm doing.
That's true.
So we were
Hadn't thought about that.
trained. Yeah, we were trained to teach on the side of the pool to where they can see us. And it's really not that difficult. Typically, you're just showing them a move and they keep going. Now, some songs I actually put choreography to, so it's similar. I don't want to call it necessarily aqua Zumba because I don't have that specific certification, but it was kind of dance aqua or aqua dance.
Yeah.
So we would do even some fun line dances in the water. And a lot of the women, I think, within those classes enjoyed it just because they couldn't do it on land, either bad knees or had knee replacements or whatever, but they could do it in the water. And some of it was some of the favorite songs. They're like, ooh, we used to do the wobble in the water. So they loved it. It was less impact for them. So it, still with the music and dancing intertwined, but yeah, I was teaching, that was the 22 classes a week. And then at this point, because I had to let some of that go going to college, which was it was a challenge, because mentally in my head, I'm going, God, you are telling me to go to school, but you're also telling me to give up about $600 a month in income.
You're like, how's this going to work out?
Right. I was like, oh, and of course, again, he is always faithful.
Amen.
I literally was making enough to take care of all of my necessities. I had to understand and learn what was a necessity and what was not. Getting a manicure and, your nails dipped in the fancy manicures that they do was not a necessity anymore.
Right.
Going out to eat all the time was not it was a good thing for me to learn also to understand how to steward my finances too, because I never really was taught that as a kid or as a teenager. My parents lived paycheck to paycheck. And so I come from a background of not saving and everything else. So I believe God kind of helped me with that.
That's a big lesson for sure. Yeah.
Yes. Some adults still don't know how to save.
Right.
So,
and I love that we're like stewarding it too, because we've been given these resources and like, what are we doing with them? Yeah.
Right.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so I went from teaching the 22 classes. I think then I ended up going down to 15. And then over the years, one of the locations I taught at in downtown Dallas, they actually closed the facility. So there went 3 classes a week. And I was like, okay. And I was like, okay, I'm going to just continue doing what I'm doing. I'm not going to add any more or stress about finding, because again, God was always providing financially. And I was very, very thankful that I was able, whenever jobs did go away, I still had money in savings as backup if something major happened.
Right.
And so I think right now I'm teaching 10 classes a week.
Okay.
Strict Zumba and toning. Majority, so I'm teaching live for LA Fitness twice a week. The rest of it we're doing on Zoom.
Okay.
Online has definitely been, and this is the senior community. It's been a little challenging. It was really rocky at the beginning because I was having to literally, outside of class, I was like, call me, I'll walk you through it and I'll get on with you and I'll tell you how. And I even did kind of like some tutorials of Zoom on Zoom so that they could learn how to work the system. And even with Stan, she's
Mhm.
like, help. And I was like, okay, this is how you do it. This is, so, and thankfully, again, another just God thing, I believe. Zoom was what platform we used for school, for online school.
Oh, cool.
Because the Bible college I graduated from, it's actually based in California, but they have what they call cohorts all over the United States, and it's even branched off into other parts of the world. So a
Mhm.
lot of our professors were online on Zoom, not in person.
That worked out really well. That's super cool.
Oh, yeah. So I knew how to work it. For the most part, I did have to learn some things as a host of how, I was like, oh, no wonder my professors could mute us. That was cool,
Yeah, exactly.
But
This is cool.
I was like, oh, I can actually make people stop talking. Because I will say this, and my seniors will testify to it. They could not, I would have to start class and just hit play and be like, we're starting, because they'd be chatting so much. So I was like,
Oh,
they
yeah.
can't do that anymore. Not at this point yet. So I was like, I can mute you now. So it's a kind of a joke that I won't be able to mute them when we get back in person.
Right.
But yeah, so it was a blessing that I'd already been aware, I've been able to use the platform before all this happened, but still being able to connect with them. I will say teaching to a screen is not as much fun as teaching to somebody that's there live with you, but
Yeah, it's so true.
it is what it is. And I've very much been a find a way, make a way type of person. And my heart for them is knowing that some of them are widowed, knowing that some of them are home by themselves, or it's just them and their spouse, and knowing that they need that social interaction. The senior center for many was a big family, and just, time to socialize and fellowship, and not having that was huge in my perspective. Because I was like, I'm an extrovert, so I was going crazy. My husband's an introvert.
Mhm.
His life, he let me know, oh, my life didn't change too much. I'm like, don't talk to me, because I need people.
Exactly. So true.
Yeah. So it was really difficult, but I was like, I've got to find a way to connect with them. And I was like, why not use Zoom? Why not? Is it perfect? No. Are there glitches? Absolutely. But it's been something to continue to keep them connected. And people that don't even have social media are learning how to run Zoom so that they can take class. And they're adapting to the culture that we are in now, which is very technologically driven. And I'm very grateful, because I was like, okay, we got to keep you guys moving. But at the same time, for many instructors, I know that it hit them hard, because self-employment and contract work, when you're out of work, you are out of pay. You don't have, there's not a PTO time. There's not
Right.
some kind of backup unless you have the savings account for it. So that was one thing I was very grateful, is like, you know what? It may not be perfect, but this is going to continue to have, some kind of income coming in, so that, I was able, because again, I wasn't married yet when all this happened, and I was finishing my bachelor's too. So it was
Yeah.
insane, but we figured it out.
Yeah, that's so great. I'm curious, what got you interested in doing your degree in ministry?
I want to say, as time was going on, so I actually went to college for 2 years before I got pregnant with Jaden, my oldest son. And my degree was focused on vocal performance and music education. So I wanted
Okay,
to be a choir teacher.
yeah.
And I look back and I'm like, praise God, he knew better. Because some of these kids nowadays, I'm like, oh my word, I don't know if I could be a teacher with some of the kids nowadays. That is a special call. Well, you teach high school,
I
right?
do.
Okay.
Yeah, I teach high school.
So it is a call. And
Yes.
having children, I think, showed me that's not necessarily your call, Amanda. I love my kiddos, but I was just like, when you have to manage others, and it depends on if their heart's in it or not too.
Yes.
As a teenager, choir was something my heart was in. So, but I also learned that some of the not they had varsity choirs, junior varsity, and then just I need the credit to graduate choir.
Right.
And I realized, okay, the ones that are varsity, we're the ones that actually want to be here. The other ones are just getting the credit. So I didn't necessarily see that at 18 years old when I started college. I was like, oh, I'm going to be a choir teacher.
Yeah.
But fast forward, I always, once I started following Christ and I gave my life to the Lord, it was something I was, reading more, wanted to understand more theologically. So I always joke, God can speak to me directly through someone. They can, say that they feel that, God is saying this to me or whatever. I can read something, but I always say God does that in threes for me to listen. I'm like, I need to know.
Kind of the repetition of like confirming this is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Because I'm in my late 20s at this point, and I kept feeling the Lord say, you're going to go back to college. And I'm like, I have 2 kids. I'm in my late 20s. All the people I graduated with that actually went and pursued a degree, have a degree. They're now getting married and having kids. I've done it all backwards. And I was like, are you sure? And several people kept telling me, Amanda, I think, this is something, the Lord wants you to go back to school, and he wants you. And I was like, okay. And I'd felt that before people started saying it. And the kicker, one woman, I went to a church event with a friend, and the guest speaker that was there didn't know me. But the one thing within, my beliefs, and the Bible does talk about prophets, I believe that God does give people knowledge to speak to those who may need to hear from someone who does not know them, so that they know that God is speaking to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of like a way of God being like, yes, I am saying this to you. It's kind of right. Yes.
And I always joke around, tell people, some people, they can read my mail. And this woman read my mail, and not only she started speaking things about my childhood, she started saying things. She goes, and God's going to use you, and he wants you to go get your education. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, okay, I hear you loud and clear. And at that point, this was the spring of 2015. And I'm like, okay. And the Lord, I kept hearing, you're going to go to school in the fall. I'm like, all right, well, it's literally midsummer, end of July, beginning of August. And I had gone to look at different colleges. So CFNI, which is Christ for the Nations, was one I looked into here in the Dallas area, but they were not accredited. And that was one thing, is I did not want to pay for something that was not an accredited degree.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And on top of that, they also, not being accredited, they did not accept financial aid. So I would have had to pay for it all out of pocket.
That would be rough. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, Lord, unless someone's going to write me a almost $10,000 check every semester, this is not going to be able to happen, but it's, again, when God wants something to happen, he'll provide what you need. I also looked into SAGU, which is in the Waxahachie area. And that was still out of my budget, big time. Although they took financial aid, the classes were more expensive. And I'm like, okay, Lord, what are we going to do? Or more or less, what is he going to do?
Right.
You're telling me this, and I'm on the hunt, and I don't know where you want me to go. And literally, so again, my spiritual mother goes to church with me too. She's sitting next to me this specific Sunday morning. And the thing is that throughout the few times that God had spoken to me through others, the one thing that people kept saying is, you're called to be an evangelist. You're called to share your testimony and preach the gospel. And I'm going, okay, whatever. It was almost terrifying to feel that, okay, you want to use me that way. But I was like, I heard him, it was just kind of going with the flow type thing. And I will never forget, I'm sitting in the front row, because we sit on the front row on Sundays. And there was a speaker there. And he was from a Bible college that was in Waxahachie, Texas. And he was explaining, and this is the School of Urban Missions. So this is the Bible school I graduated from. And he starts talking, and he's like, our specific cohort focuses on evangelism. And I get an elbow into my side, because my spiritual mom's sitting up here, and she knows what the Lord said to me. And he's like, and we're an accredited school. We take financial aid. I got another elbow into my side. And it's very affordable in comparison to bigger college. I got another elbow, and I looked at her. I was like, I got it. I hear him. Yeah. And I remember, I'm just like, I hear him. This is apparently where I'm supposed to be.
Right.
Again, being just who I was at that point, I procrastinated. I end up I'd gone on a retreat, came back home, and, that thought comes to mind again. And I know it's just God, just that gentle nudge and reminder, you still haven't contacted Joe Oden from the school. And I'm like, okay. Send an email, get an instant response back from his wife. Hey, literally for the fall semester, they had apparently closed everything out. And as a new student, you have to send in, your testimony written out. You have to send in, they want to know any kind of background history, because there's, I always joked around and said that, our cohort we were the misfits, because a lot of the people that I graduated with have either been in prison, they've had drug addictions, they've, God's truly delivered them from a very horrific lifestyle, just complete amazing transformations. Our cohort advisor, Joe, he was a drug addict, radically saved. So it's one of those things that, they want to know who they're dealing with. They want to know how long, they want recommendations from pastors, how long you've been serving in the ministry, if you're serving in the ministry or whatever church you're at, and just know who you are before they say, yeah, come on,
Right.
Because one thing I've learned about ministry is it's not for everybody. And some people try to answer a call that's not necessarily what, it's like getting the education is a good thing, but going through Bible school, there was some fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say, you've got to be ready for it, because there was a lot of things during school that just flipped my life upside down, and some crazy stuff that had happened, but in a good way, it made me stronger.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so I'm responding. I'm like, okay. And Joe calls me. And he goes, hey, and I'm going, oh my gosh, I'm talking, those within the Assemblies of God here in the North Texas area know who Joe Oden is, because he's a very well-known evangelist in the area. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, he's calling me. And so
I'm on the phone with him.
I know, it was the coolest thing ever. And I'm going, whoa. And at that point, he goes, okay, Amanda, I'm going to need you to do this, and get it in. It's Wednesday. He goes, I need this all by Friday. And I was like, okay, now, one good thing, and my husband's learning this about me. You give me a deadline, I'll have it done by the deadline. You tell me, just whenever you have time, 2-3 weeks could possibly go by. Give me a deadline. I work well with deadlines.
That's totally how I am too, actually.
And again, it's like, I don't know if it's just because, again, I'm an extrovert and I can be all over the place, but I have to have structure. I have to have deadlines. And I know this about myself. For me to be as productive as needed, I need a deadline. And so I've had to learn how to do that to myself even.
Yeah.
And college will help you with that structure, because there's deadlines all the time.
So true.
But yeah, so anyways, I got everything in by the deadline, literally it was less than a month that I was sitting in class, my very first, evening class, and I'm sitting there. And God said, didn't I tell you you're going to go to school in the fall? And I just kind of laugh, sitting there and I'm like, you got jokes. In the spring, I was trying to figure out where I was going to go. And then in less than a month's time, everything was taken care of. Financial aid there was no issues with financial aid. There was everything, all the paperwork, everything, the interview process for it lined up, doors just started swinging wide open.
That's incredible.
I was like, and this is the path. So this is where I'm supposed to be.
So cool. Do you have a vision for the future and kind of what you're hoping to walk into ministry-wise?
So at this point, I'm actually interning under my worship pastor. So he's kind of showing me the ropes as what a worship pastor's responsibilities are, what their day-to-day, and the interesting thing about ministry is it's not cut and dry 9 to 5. It's all the time.
Yeah.
I was a youth leader for a season, and that's when I started to learn ministries that way, because when you get a call at 10 o'clock at night from a teenager that's just, all up in arms for, whatever reason, whether it's a boy or family trouble or whatever, you pick that phone up and you pray with them and you speak with them. And that kind of showed me, okay, this is not a normal 9 to 5 like some people perceive it to be. And so my worship pastor's kind of showing me the ropes. And that was one thing I remember people always asking me, what are you going to do after you graduate? And I was like, I really don't know. Some people already had positions they were walking in ministry. I have always been very much of a servant and served in my church, whether I've served everything from in the nursery, I've served with 2-year-olds up to the teenagers. But I truly, my heart has always been after women, just empowering them. And, God has again brought Mary Kay back to the forefront to where there's time I can focus on it. And it's in a place to where I'm not financially stressed. I'm not having to do everything on my own anymore. Thank you, Jesus, for my husband.
Yay.
And the blessing behind him also is he's supportive of whatever my focus and vision is. He's 100% behind me, always positive. And that's, again, so powerful to have those positive words, because that's where, the enemy likes to detour us with the negative of what could go wrong, or that you're not going to be able to do that. But at this point I'm going, okay, we're back with this company, and my main goal is just to reach as many women as I can, using whatever vehicle God gives me to use, because ministry does not have to happen in the four walls of a church. I've prayed for women after Zumba class. I have prayed for people in the grocery stores when they start opening up and talking to me. And so that's the thing, is I'm going, okay, well, this is, again, obviously this specific company is focused mainly on women. So we'll see what comes from that. But I believe that, reaching women, empowering them, helping them grow in their faith, being that spiritual mother to those who need a spiritual mother, discipling those who are new in their walk, and having that, because that right there was a pivotal point for me. If those ladies had not been surrounding me and helping me, I really don't know if I'd be where I am today, because I believe God truly sent them to help me grow. And as far as worship, that's my heart. I love to sing. I love to worship. They always joke with me. They're like, Amanda, don't be busting Zumba moves on stage on Sunday. But
that's great.
But I do get moving. I move with the music, and I'm very cautious and aware, because I'm like, okay, I'm on stage helping lead worship. This is not a Zumba class.
Right.
It's not all ladies in the audience. I have to be mindful. But it's one of those things, like, I'm going to continue to teach Zumba until the Lord says, okay, next. I love that I'm able to reach the women there, and still the Lord's connected me with a friend that's part of my Zumba class, and she's wanting me to help. Once COVID kind of lifts, she's talking about having seminars, and she goes, I want you to speak. So just being available to whatever God has, whether that's through Mary Kay, or whether that's just through, speaking at a seminar, or even just a podcast like this.
Yay, exactly.
Wherever he wants to use my testimony and allow me to just give hope and empower others to know this woman that you see today was not where I was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And statistics say one thing about my life. Whenever, my mother's 15, pregnant with me, has, 2 weeks after her 16th birthday, I was born. Statistics say I should still be a single parent living on welfare, unable to take care of myself, without an education. And the fact that I graduated high school is a big thing. And I think I looked up, statistics also show single moms, like the percentage of single moms, I think it's like either 5 to 7% of single mothers actually obtain a bachelor's degree.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I could be wrong on the numbers. I don't completely remember, but I want to say it was around that. But reading that and stopping and thinking, my mom was 15. She could have made a choice and I wouldn't have been here. I'm going, she saw life, and I'm thankful. And I tell her every day, I was like, Mom, I thank you. My birthday, I give a shout out to my mother, because at 16 years old, I would not have been thinking of having a kid.
For real. Okay. And God had such purpose in your life.
You took the words. Yeah. And so allowing people to see, no matter what they come from, God can make beauty from ashes.
Amen.
So, and the Bible tells us that. And so just knowing that I'm able to share those things with women on whatever platform that the Lord hands me, to just be able to reach them, and to reach those that I once was, the single mom, the woman who has gone through so much emotional, mental abuse, that they need that empowerment. They need to hear stories of people who have went from that life to where they are now, and being able to see that. And that's my heart, is to just be able to empower and enrich the lives of women wherever I go.
That's so incredible. That actually leads well into, speaking of statistics, I'm sure there are people listening that are in a situation that may not be exactly like yours, but similar, feeling overwhelmed or feeling isolated, or like beaten down, like you were saying, like the self-esteem just totally wiped out. And yeah, do you have any encouragement that you would like to share to that person that's listening today?
I would say keep looking up. Don't look at the past. Don't look at what's behind you. Look at what's ahead. Believe in the impossible, because we serve a God that does the impossible. And to never give up on you, that God's always in your corner. He's always right there. When you may feel the lowest, when you may feel the most alone, He's listening, and He does care. He loves you, and the plans He has are beyond anything that you can ever fathom. The only thing I can think of that just continues to resound in my mind is just be obedient. Be obedient. Wherever He calls you, whatever He's telling you to do, be obedient, because there's a saying, the grass is always greener on the other side, depending on if it's watered, depending on where the water comes from. And whenever God is in it, there's going to be no adversity. There's going to be no confusion. It may not sound ideal, but obedience, I can testify that obedience is what has gotten me to the place I was in, even if the obedience came from being pushed from a situation I shouldn't have been in, and knowing that. And I'm thankful that I serve a God that loved me and loves me enough to push me to that limit to be able to become the woman He has desired me to become.
So beautiful. Thank you for that. And kind of in a similar vein, I like to ask everyone, what is one thing that you would want to share with other artists as well? Because the majority probably of our listeners are in some arts realm, whether that's with music or dance or visual art, that kind of thing. So yeah, any word that you have for them?
I would say just keep smiling, keep going. You really don't know who you're impacting. My tagline, and anyone who knows me knows my tagline in Zumba class, whenever I am working them out at their hardest, I always say, I love you. And so your words, whether it's music, whether it's vocally, whether it's impacting someone somewhere. So just continue. You've been given a gift, use it. And don't let anyone rain on your parade.
Yeah, so good. I love that. So. Thank you so much. This has been awesome to get to hear your story firsthand. I know Cian has shared with me some about your journey, and it's just so incredible seeing how God has worked in your life, and so encouraging knowing He's in our court, like for each one of us, that He's working those things together in our life for good and to give us a future too. So love that encouragement, and I'm so excited that you're continuing to share your story, because I think that's going to continue to impact people beyond what you didn't even realize too, like you were saying. So love that. And I like to ask everyone, this is more of just like a fun question, but what is one of your favorite things right now?
I will say, and this is kind of cheesy, being a fitness instructor, I really don't play with makeup much. So kind of opening that door to the Mary Kay world again. I've ordered tons of different stuff, and I've been doing online makeup tutorials. So just playing with makeup and I mean, I'm about to be 34, but it's so funny that just being able to play with it, show other women fun stuff. I'm having a lot of fun with that right now, because I mean, we're stuck inside, not completely, but I haven't played with makeup in years because I haven't had to.
Yeah, that's true. That's super fun.
Yeah, I was like, I can show you how to do it and play with it. And sometimes they order, so I make money too, so that works. Yeah, but
exactly.
But that, and one other thing, my youngest son, what I've really enjoyed, because when I was in school, I was in books all the time, so I haven't been able to catch up on Netflix or anything else that was happening in the world around me.
Right.
So my 10-year-old has me hooked on The Flash.
Oh, fun.
So cool. We've been, I think we're on season 4 now, but we've been watching The Flash. So that's kind of outside of playing with makeup, spending time with my kids, and, watching just funny, cheesy, shows about a guy that can run as fast as lightning, literally. So just the simple things.
Yeah, that's so great. I love it. Yeah. Well, if anyone wants to try and connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
So I do have Facebook and social media. And I actually have a group. It's called the Beauty Beasts.
Nice.
So in this group, that's where I do some of my makeup tutorials, as well as I share, I've told people, share your favorite recipe, or it's just a place where mainly women, my husband is on that just so that I can see what things look like on the other side, but it's all women on there, just to, I post encouraging things on there, quotes, ask fun questions, just a way to connect. So there's that link. Of course, you can friend me on Facebook if you like. If you do that, you might want to send me a private message, because if we have no mutual friends, I typically don't accept. The quickest way to get my attention would be to jump to, if you follow the link to my group, that's going to be the best way to get in touch with me. And then, of course, my Instagram handle, which is his_princess_87.
Love it. Perfect. Well, I'll definitely link to those in the show notes so people can connect with you. And just thank you again for sharing your story and taking the time to come on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I'm so inspired by Amanda's story, and I'm so encouraged to see how God can take things in our lives that are meant to harm us and use those for good for our future. You can find all the links from today's episode, as well as the full show notes, on our website, creativeimpactpodcast.com. There you'll also find additional resources and a link to our Patreon community. We would love to have you join the Patreon community. It's a place where you can get extra content and also support the podcast. Our most recent Patreon content is some extended conversation with Tiffany Schretferman from episode 34. She shares about what it looks like to rely on God in places where we feel completely inadequate. You can check that out by going to creativeimpactpodcast.com/Patreon. That's creativeimpactpodcast.com/Patreon. Thank you so much for listening to the Creative Impact Podcast. The music for the show was produced by Michael Cash. Share the show with a friend, check out our Patreon community, and I'll see you next week.